So, okay, we are off.
What just happened? I was kicked out.
I am live. Welcome, everybody. Again, thank you all for coming to this latest living room series that we've been putting on since the beginning of our wonderful COVID pandemic. But I really want to thank the New Mexico Military History Museum for collaborating with us on putting this program together. And tonight is going to be a part of the anniversary of the end of the war in the Pacific, which was basically, they signed the papers on September 2nd, which was just a couple of days ago. So it's the 75th anniversary of that. And also, of course, the 75th anniversary of dropping the first atomic bomb. And tonight's program is Eric Nelson's really remarkable film called Apocalypse 45, which is basically about the soldiers' experiences in the Pacific through that year and up until the surrender itself. So thank you, Eric, for bringing the film into us. We really appreciate having you as part of the Living Room series. And also with us tonight, it's going to be four of us who are going to be chatting about this film. General Kenneth A. Nava, who is the Adjutant General for the state of New Mexico, is with us this evening. Florian L. Vital, who is the Command Historian for the New Mexico National Guard. And of course, Eric Nelson, the director of Apocalypse 45, documentary filmmaker whose films include The Cold Blue that was made for HBO, A Gray State and Dreams with Sharp Teeth. And he also produced a number of Werner Herzog's documentaries, including Grizzly Man, Into the Abyss, and The Cave of Forgotten Dreams. And many of you in the Living Room series know me. I've been here before, but for those of you who haven't seen me before, my name is Paul Barnes, and I worked for over 30 years with Ken Burns on his documentaries as an editor and producer. So that's what we're planning to do tonight, and I'm just going to get the show started. And I'd like to direct the first question to Eric Nelson. And Eric, I just wanted to know, how did Apocalypse 45 come into being? When and why did you conceive of the film?
Well, a few things were looming over me a year ago when I conceived of the project. First one being the impending 75th anniversary of VJ Day in Hiroshima, which we've just gone through for the last 3 weeks. The other thing was the technology that allows us to take film footage and digitally put it into a format that allows us to blow it up to widescreen and, in essence, resurrect the quality, not colorize it, but make the footage look crystal clear. And the most important thing on my mind was the age of the 24 men that we wanted to interview. All of them, the youngest guy was in his 94, and the oldest was 101. And I really had this feeling of a last call. So that confluence of anniversary, technology, and the interview subjects made this a necessity to do when I did it.
I gotcha. I hear you. To me, the film is a remarkable feat of cinematic storytelling about this period of time in the Pacific in 45. I'm curious how General Nava felt about the film. Just in general, General Nava, any responses about having seen the film?
I think he's not there.
Oh.
We lost him in the mountains.
We lost General in the mountains. He's in the Pecos Wilderness, enjoying the outdoors right now. So let me turn that over to Florian. Florian, do you have any reactions just overall to the film?
Yeah, overall, I mean, the film was really greatly done. And what it really reminded me of right from the get-go when I started watching this film, it's like, this must be the continuation of the 2018 They Shall Not Grow Old documentary by Peter Jackson. I mean, the footage of the news, it brings the whole story to life. And it's important for us to really get the audience engaged in that, start asking questions. And this is now obviously when the historians come in and, you know, we can pick up from there. So it was really remarkably done, and there's lots of great points that I think we're going to discuss here this evening that of importance.
Well, let me just jump in here as the director. This was really a sequel to my film, The Cold Blue, which was released 6 months before Peter Jackson's movie. So I beat as excellent Peter Jackson's film was. I have to say, remains a sore point for me, because The Cold Blue got out there. As an historian, I know the dates. We premiered in June of 2018. Peter Jackson premiered in October of 2018.
Gotcha. General Nava, I just asked a question, kind of a general response to Eric Nelson's film, to Apocalypse 45. Any thoughts or feelings overall about the film?
Well, first of all, I've seen a lot of combat footage. I've never seen it compiled in the way that it was done here. I think it was an incredible piece of work. The narration or the commentary by the actual veterans there was incredible. For me, it took a very personal look. I had an uncle that was killed with the 6th Marines in Okinawa, and there was footage from April and from June. My uncle was killed on May 25th of 1945. He was a PFC in the 6th Marines, and there was 6th Marines footage there. So it was incredible for me to watch that. And I think it was just a great documentary. And Eric, you and everybody else that had any bit in this, I congratulate you. Thank you for doing what you did.
Well, thank you very much.
Stylistically, I find the film to be quite unique in the way in which it was made. And I spoke to Eric a little bit about this yesterday. And I think that its formal choices are apparent right from the film's opening, right with those opening credits. And I'd like to play just the very first clip, which will start with the end of the credits and then go into the opening of the film. And then we'll talk about it on the other side.
This is a Japanese
ballad
which was written
a few hundred years ago.
It means they want
It means they want peace on this whole
for the sake of people around the world. But, you know, I haven't done this in how many years? 40, 50 years? 視界のみ静かにて国も 収まる時いつの風枝を鳴らさぬよなれよ
Oh, sorry, folks. We had a little problem with the video. We couldn't get quite to the end of the part of the clip that I wanted to get through. I had planned to show you through the opening title and then the VJ Day celebration in Honolulu. So since most people, you know, everybody probably has already seen the film, I chose this clip because I think it's quite remarkable that, you know, while the opening credits are playing, we begin to hear the crew talking to one of the vets. In this case, it's a Hiroshima survivor, Issei Nakagawa. And then he sings that wonderful song in Japanese. For most of it, it's almost all voiceover. So what Eric is doing is establishing that it's primarily going to be a film with voiceover. And then when we come out of that, he shows us scenes from Hiroshima, which are in the aftermath. And you see some daily life coming back into that ruined city. And then you notice that all of this newsreel is not black and white, it's color, which is also unique in terms of World War II films. It's very rare when you see color footage being used, especially if in Eric's film, it's used exclusively through the entire film as a stylistic choice. The other thing is that he's providing historical context with title cards. Just these simple white on black lettering with a very simple historical statement that gives you the right context. And occasionally he uses these wonderful film ID slates where that gives you an ID for the place where you are and maybe another bit of information. In this case, if the clip went on, you would have seen Victory that was on the slate for the VJ Day celebration. And then when we come into the VJ celebration, there's a thing that Eric does that I absolutely loved. He starts with a small square frame in the center in black and white, and you see the soldiers celebrating. And then you zoom out to full wide screen. And as you're zooming out, if you remember, it turns into color. And so finally, the entire screen is filmed with this wonderful color image of all these soldiers celebrating VJ Day. And again, Eric is saying to us, you know, this is not going to be your standard square frame black and white, but you're going to see this fully restored color film footage, which is quite extraordinary. Eric, I was just wondering, could you talk about how you arrived at those choices? I mean, basically, you're limiting what you want to see, but did you have that thought about that was going to be the way the film was going to be from the get-go, or did that something that you arrived at in the cutting room?
No, I pretty much knew what I wanted to do. I was very conscious of opening up a time machine, a time portal, if you will. So I wanted to start with the black and white footage to show what you're used to seeing, and then bring it on dramatically in full color widescreen. And to be honest with you, part of it was a reaction to when I finally did catch up with Peter Jackson's film. I felt that when he opened up his time machine, he didn't do it as dramatically as I thought he could. I wanted that Wizard of Oz moment where you're like, oh my God, look at this, it's filling the frame. And then the sound effects in the background, before we open up it, we hear the explosion. So we're immediately disorienting and unsettling the audience. We're trying to tell them this is not what you're used to, and we're changing up the rules of presentation. And if people were a little confused or overwhelmed or unsure what to think, that's precisely the intention of the director.
Could you talk about the title cards just a little bit? Why the choice of title cards instead of a narrator?
Well, a narrator automatically shackles the film to a voice, and it's conventional. And I wanted to get out of the way of the story as a director and a filmmaker and let the audience connect directly to the experiences. Again, it's the time portal concept where, you know, there's a great moment in one of my favorite movies, Christopher Reeve's Somewhere in Time with Jane Seymour, one of the most popular romantic movies of all time, where he's back in time and then he accidentally reaches into his pocket and he finds a modern penny, and that penny pulls him, wrenches him from the experience and catapults him out of the era. So in a way, I wanted this film to never have what I called a penny moment. And I used that phrase when I was putting it together.
I got that. Well, I just think it's really quite remarkable. And it works beautifully all the way through, absolutely beautifully. A question for General Nava. Could you tell us specifically about the involvement of New Mexicans in the Pacific War, and then maybe about their importance during the entire of World War II? Could you talk a little bit about New Mexicans' involvement in the Pacific and the war itself?
Sure. Okay, so I'll be speaking. That doesn't look very good. How's that? I'll be speaking pretty much from the New Mexico National Guard perspective. Although we know that well over 50,000 New Mexicans served in World War II, a very significant amount of our population. I'm having hard times finding the exact numbers, but New Mexico was about 500,000 in that time frame. So about 10% of our population went and served in World War II. So that's a significant number. Excuse me, I'm sorry about the background noise. The New Mexico National Guard had 1,800 soldiers from the 200th Coast Artillery that were mobilized and put in federal service, trained at Fort Bliss, Texas, and were serving in the Philippines with the primary mission of defending Clark Field and Fort Stauffensburg. They were there when on December 8th, when the Japanese attacked the Philippines, and they were part of the heroic effort to try to defend and hold the Philippines against the Japanese 14th Army. Many of them suffered the Bataan Death March, not all of them, but many of them did. Many of them suffered 3.5 years of internment in Japanese prison camps, either in the Philippines, Mukden, Manchuria, Japan, different locations. And about 900 of those 1,800 returned home to the United States and to New Mexico. New Mexico paid an incredible price in the Pacific theater. And again, I couldn't begin to tell you how many New Mexicans. My grandfather was in the Pacific flying on B-17s and B-24s. So another piece of footage, I love seeing those bombers. It gave me a little bit of insight into what my grandfather did.
Right.
I hope that helps a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. That was terrific. Thank you very much. The film is called Apocalypse 45, which I feel is an incredibly strong title. Obviously, it refers to the dropping of the atomic bomb, but to me, it also refers to the endless battles the U.S. soldiers fought all across those Pacific islands. Battles fought with fanatical brutality by the Japanese. Let's look at the next clip from the Iwo Jima sequence.
You sort of have an air of fire about yourself. Inquiry
because the other ones haven't had any experience.
They're all scared to death.
They're all scared to death. They act break.
A lot of tension in the air, a lot of
A lot of
cigarettes,
tension in the air, a lot of cigarettes being smoked crazy.
and, a lot of kids
And
praying.
a lot of kids praying mostly.
It's kind of a, well,
It's
you're,
kind of a, well,
embedded death is what it is.
embedded death is what it is.
General Kuribashi issued
General
this warning.
Kuribashi issued this order. He said, we're here to defend this island to the limit of our
We
strength.
must devote ourselves
We must
to that
devote
task
ourselves to that task
entirely.
entirely.
Each of your shots must
kill many
We
Americans.
cannot allow ourselves
We
to be
cannot
captured
allow
by
ourselves
long live
to be captured by the enemy.
And of
Long
course,
live the enemy.
they followed it to a T.
And of course, they followed it to a T.
When the ramp went down on the Higgins boat, and we
When the
ran
ramp
out of
went
there,
down on the
hit the
Higgins
beach,
boat,
there's
we
still
ran out of there.
artillery and
Hit the
mortars
beach.
coming around.
There's still
I
artillery
look
and
down
mortars
this
coming
beach
around.
to my left,
I look down this
and
beach
here
to my
are
left.
stacks
Here are
of
stacks
bodies.
of bodies.
Yeah, it was not a friendly place.
Yeah, it was not a friendly
A lot of
place.
thoughts going through your mind.
A lot of
you know.
thoughts going through your mind.
It was so chaotic.
It was so chaotic.
Absolutely, there were
Absolutely,
jeeps
there were
blowing up,
jeeps
tanks
blowing up,
stalled.
tanks
The thing
stalled.
that I've never been
The
able to
thing that I've
eradicate
never
from
been
my
able to
mind
eradicate from my mind
are the dead.
are the dead. All righty. That is such an amazing and powerful sequence to me. And that last line, the thing I can't eradicate from my mind are the dead. I'm so struck by the power of the vets' voices telling the story of what happened during these battles. That those voices are set against these amazing color newsreel images that you found, Eric. Just curious. I mean, I think many of the audience might have thought of this when they watched the film. Is you made the decision not to see the vets on screen, so we never cut to them and see their faces telling these stories, but to keep you still in the moment. Again, could you tell us why you came to that decision?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's a penny moment. Seeing the veterans today pull you out from 1945. It would wrench you out of the moment and put you today looking back, where the goal here was to put you there, keep you there, and there's no pretense or false construct between the filmmaker and the material. I really, really am a fanatic about removing my point of view from everything I do and making it seem like it's sort of a, it just sort of unfolds in its own way and you're not conscious of the craft, if that makes any sense. And if you have a narrator reading something, it means somebody had to write it. This is the opinion of the filmmaker. Choices were made and selections were made. And I really don't want to do that, not in this film.
No, I got you. When you've screened the film for people, have any people complained about not seeing the vets on screen? Is that
No, actually,
or have by and large just
people are a little confused. Or they don't quite know. They're dialing themselves into the experience, which again, I don't have any problems with. I'm a fan of Christopher Nolan,
Right.
whose Dunkirk was a definite inspiration for how to approach a World War II movie. And sometimes you don't always have the thing with television is you have to absolutely always, this is what we're doing. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're doing it. And you have to you have to make it very clear to everybody. And if there's one thing I learned working with Werner Herzog in art house documentaries, it's okay sometimes to go be a little elliptical and let people find you. You don't always have to go to find them.
Exactly. I think that's part of what makes this film so unique, Eric. So I think it's very, very successful.
I myself accepted it almost immediately once you had established it in the film, for sure. And I think it just added to the overall power of the piece, for sure. A question for you, General Nava. In early 1945, the war in Europe was clearly winding down as the Allies invaded Germany. But why was it taking so much longer to get Japan to surrender? It seemed we'd have to invade the Japanese mainland. Why was the US military command so fearful of the possibility?
I don't think that they were fearful of it. They accepted that reality. I think what the Japanese one of the great things that opportunity
Where General Nava, where your audio is kind of breaking up on us here. Is it breaking up for everybody there?
A little bit, yeah. You know, it's a tricky.
try I'm gonna turn off the
Could I turn
and
could I turn that question over to Florian? Florian, would you like to respond?
Sure.
So yeah, really the will to fight, just like General Nava started to talk about. I mean, it was reality. Obviously, that's people are still, historians are still discussing was the atomic bomb necessary. But you heard from the veterans themselves, this is what saved life. This is what they truly believed, and you saw it in this documentary. So, but it goes really strong into their culture. If you look at the culture of the Japanese, and this is where this whole fight all the way to annihilation comes from. It was another interesting point that was made in that documentary when we saw the footage of the civilians jumping off the cliffs and killing themselves. I mean, there's so much more going on, and thinking about what have they experienced or what were they told to be like that, to be, where we see the US as monsters coming to their homeland, so defend at all costs, which is kind of very similar to if you think about the war in Europe, looking at the Eastern Front compared to the Western Front. Much more heavy fighting at the Eastern Front between the Germans and the Russians, due to obvious reasons, helping the civilians out, trying to get them away from the Soviet advance and stuff like that. The fighting on the Western Front, not so much, not as brutal. So,
Okay, let's take another look.
Might be back with the audio here.
General Nava, are you there? I don't think he's there.
I am here.
Oh, you are. Did you want to add to
Yes,
anything? Did you hear Florian's response? Did you want to add anything
I
to
did. I
that?
heard his response, and I think that's exactly it. The U.S. military, the leadership, recognized the Japanese were going to fight to all ends. That they truly believed that that the United States soldiers were monsters, and surrender was not something that they were willing to consider. Again, I think that the footage there on Okinawa, the discussion about the people that were fighting to the very end, it gives you some insight into what exactly we were going through.
Gotcha. Okay. Actually, I'd like to go to the Okinawa sequence now. If we could do the clip from the Okinawa scene.
You can't describe death, nor can you forget it. Right now, as soon as you mention it, I can smell it. You're so thankful when there's a little wind that's blowing the stuff away from you.
Hang on, a little technical difficulty again. Jason's trying to run it again.
Well, while we're getting it going, it's that concept of war without mercy, no surrender and no quarter, that really animate the Pacific War.
You can't describe death,
Yes.
nor can you forget it. Right now, as soon as you mention it,
Here we go.
you can't describe death, nor can you forget it. Wind right now, as soon as you mention it, I can smell it. It's very hard to carry on when you're smelling. You're so thankful when there's a little wind that's blowing the stuff away from you. It's very hard to carry on
when
It's
you're
there forever.
smelling
You get
that,
away from it.
it affects
Just thinking
the
about
way
it,
you
it'll come
think
back
and
to
move.
you 78 years later or whatever.
Some of it, like the smell, is there forever. You get away from it, but just thinking about it, it'll come back to you 78 years later or whatever it is.
Japanese soldiers. And then a couple of guys started to walk over to him and look down at him, and I joined. And
We killed every one of those
down at him, and
Japanese
one guy
soldiers.
said, "Well, this guy
And then
couldn't run
a
very
couple
much
of guys
'cause he had
started to walk
40
over
pounds
to
of
him and
lead
look
in his
down at
back."
him, and I joined, and we were all looking down at him. And one guy said, well, this
And I
guy
laughed
couldn't run
also.
very much because he had 40 pounds of lead in his back. And everybody laughed. And I laughed also.
I think the worst part of combat in the whole time, in all the islands, the worst part was picking up your buddy's pieces and trying to fit a body together.
I think the
And you
worst
could wrap
part
it
of
up on
combat in the
That
whole
got to
time,
you,
in all the
because
islands,
you always
the
knew
worst
how
part was
close it was
picking
to
up your
yourself.
buddy's pieces and trying to fit a body together, then you can wrap it up on you. That got
There
you in
were
a
a lot
lot
of
because
things
you always
that
knew
bothered us
how
a
close it
great
was
deal.
to yourself.
But I think that was really the worst.
There were a lot of things that bothered us a great deal, but I think that was really the worst.
I still can't forgive me. Because there's no joy. There's no glamour in killing someone.
I still can't
I
forgive
don't
him
give a damn who he is.
because there's no joy,
And I'm 94
there's
years
no
old.
glamour
That
in
means
killing
I'm
someone.
gonna be. I'm
I don't give a damn who he is. And I'm 94 years old. That means
standing in front of
I'm
God.
going to be. I'm sorry.
Okay. We had some technical difficulties here. Eric, was that all playing in sync roughly for you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it looked pretty. You know, we know what clip you were playing.
Okay, all right. For me, that's one of the sequences with the horror of what the vets were enduring is so powerful. And yet, what I love about the sequence, Eric, is at the end when he says there's no joy in killing, there's no glamour in killing. You have these wonderful shots of that one soldier rescuing those two white rabbits. It's this in the midst of this carnage. There's this wonderful moment of tenderness, and you deliberately chose to use those shots in juxtaposition with that vet statement. And again, it just creates this really powerful moment of mixed emotions that I think is one of the hallmarks of the film. Can you talk about that choice? Is that conscious on your part to include those kinds of moments?
Absolutely. And this is where, Paul, I say you ought to consider making a living editing documentaries, because that shot you picked out is probably my favorite shot. If someone said, "What's your favorite shot in the entire film?"
Rabbits?
It's the rabbits. I spotted that and the raw footage, and I saved that soundbite, which I had from a gentleman named Ralph Simino about I'm 94-year-olds for that shot. And it's pretty much the most powerful punch of the film, which has a lot of punches. And it's not because it's bloody or it shows gun camera footage of planes exploding. It's because of its sort of the haunted quotidian nature of that. Guys in the mud petting a white rabbit. It's
Right.
so evocative. And if somebody said, well, what's different about your movies than other war documentaries? I would say, well, because that's the most important shot in the film. That's the shot that leapt out at me. The other stuff is easy. If you have footage of kamikazes or B-29s firebombing, that's a fairly easy, obligatory choice, if you will. But the rabbits to me are that was the shot that says if there was a blinking author's message underneath the film, that's where it would go for me.
I gotcha. That's how I took it. It's gorgeous. I was just curious, General Nava and Florian, do you want to make any comments about the kind of the open honesty that the vets
Eric talk to express in the film. They're very open and honest about their feelings about what's going on, in a way you don't often hear sometimes from veterans. Did that strike you, or any comments about that?
Well, I think that was one of the most powerful parts of this, is that it didn't hide any of the horrors of war. It didn't hide any of the, the incredibly terrible things that man can do to man. My grandfather was a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne. He was 73 years old before he was diagnosed with PTS. He jumped into Holland. He jumped into Normandy. He fought in Bastogne. He was 73 years old before he was diagnosed with PTS. He spent his entire adult life fighting these demons, and I loved that Eric was able to bring that into this film. He didn't hide it, and it showed. It showed that.
We lost you again for a second. Florian, any comment from you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that is an important part. And, if you're in the military right now, it's the same thing. The feelings of, if you're a soldier, you're a soldier. It doesn't matter what country. Many of the things that you will experience are the same. Many things that those veterans talked about, some of them are, about regret. That is what every soldier feels afterwards. After, the mission is done, it has to be done at that point. But it doesn't go past by somebody, very easy. So, a very important message. Really good. Well done.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Eric, one of the qualities I like about the film is the balance that you achieved between the vets discussing military gear and processes and procedures and their emotional responses. And I think it's kind of exemplified in one of the aerial battle sequences that I like a lot in the film. It really shows that balance that you achieve. So can we play that next clip of the aerial battle?
The fighters, every one of them had a gun camera in the wing. It would be activated by the same switch that you were firing the guns with.
The gun camera takes a picture of whatever you're shooting at. And if you shoot a Jap and you fire him, if he's on fire, then you get credit for it. Because you're not going to stay around watching him burn.
I had 2010 vision, and I could see the airplanes before anybody ever saw. And I could put myself in position.
It didn't take you long. And then you just give them a squirt. That 50 caliber just rips things all apart when it hits. It does a beautiful job, I'll put it that way.
We could outdive them. Our protection mainly would be to dive away from them. If we tried to turn with them, they could turn inside of us. Means they got to make a real tight turn. They can do that with a zero.
I just fired long enough for that guy to, catch on fire, and then I released that and pulled up behind that other one, and when I got it in my sights upside down, I pulled the trigger and blew him up.
4 or 5 rounds and baby, she come apart almost invariably. You never thought one iota about the guy in it. At least I never did. I don't think any of the other guys did either. It's very, very impersonal.
All right.
I mean, I just love that scene because I learn about the power of the 45 gun. I learn about what the pilots know about the Zeros and their vulnerabilities and their strengths. I love hearing how they describe how they can get away from the planes after they shoot them. All of those details are just so rich to me in terms of understanding these guys' knowledge about how to fight and how to protect themselves. It's an absolutely wonderful thing to see. It's a beautifully edited scene, Eric, I think. When you hear those voices and accompaniment to some of those images, especially when he hits the plane and then he starts swooping up, just as he describes in the VO. And then again, at the end of the scene, you have this wonderful grace note, which is, I'm assuming it's the Japanese pilot coming down in the
Yeah,
parachute.
he bailed out over his home.
I mean, it's right. But it was just a beautiful way to end the scene, which is so violent throughout. But then that graceful image of the parachute is a wonderful way to end the thing. Again, do you want to talk a little
Well, one
bit
thing I want to say,
about
both of
decisions in the cutting room?
Both of the men who are both of those voices, Abner Ost and Charles Schlegel, both have passed away since we did the interviews 6 months ago. Charles Schlegel, who's talks about the pilot, he passed away from COVID, and Abner Ost was buried last week. So I just want to point that out about when I mentioned at the beginning of this that the urgent deadline to get this done. Those voices are now silent. You'll never hear them again, and they will never answer questions like that again. And as far as the editing choices in this particular sequence, that's the editor, Paul Marengo. I gave the bites and he had the footage. So I would like to claim credit for the shots, and the beautiful editing of that. I had nothing to do with it other than to say, great, okay, let's move on to the next sequence, looking at my watch. So, but there is a feeling and a tone to get rock and roll on you. Neil Young plays with a band called Crazy Horse, who are like the ultimate garage musicians. They're not very good, and he's played with them for 50 years. And people ask Neil Young, you're Neil Young, you can play with the best musicians on the planet. Why do you play with these guys? And when Neil Young says, yeah, but they got the spook. So that's one of my watchwords is you want to put the spook in things, where you put the spook in. And the shot of the parachute is a moment of spook.
Exactly. Let's move on a second. I'd like to go back to the Japanese just not giving up. I mean, they knew that the defeat was impending. They knew it was inevitable. And the troops in the Pacific were absolutely terrified of the upcoming invasion. And you can hear that in many of the voiceovers that are in the film. The U.S. had a secret. General Nava, can you tell us about the U.S. military's options about how to end the war with Japan? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? About what was the military command thinking late 44 into 45 in terms of how to bring this horror to an end?
I can give just probably opinion. Florian might be able to, or Eric might be able to give more from a historical perspective. But I think in the documentary we did see the effects of firebombing, right? Incendiary bombs over Tokyo. There were things that the military was using. We saw the footage of Curtis LeMay, talking about what we would do in order to try to inflict the most punishment possible to get them to capitulate. And it really was, we were using everything that was in our arsenal to make that happen. And the Manhattan Project, which was centered here in, a lot of it done here in New Mexico, gave us another tool to use. And again, Apocalypse, that's a very appropriate title for that use of that weapon. But I'm not really sure what we were thinking. I know we were trying everything we possibly could in order to try to get them to give up.
Right. Florian, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, the U.S. military command really weren't sure if the bomb was going to work or not. They must have been planning alternate plans. Can you discuss that at all? Is that true, or am I off base there?
Well, okay, so we obviously got the island hopping. We trying to get to the mainland just before. I mean, it's all the things that we saw in the movie. Preparation for invasion. Of course, once we get to Okinawa, that's when we get pretty close to mainland Japan, and then that's really what General Nava started talking about, and really trying to break the will of the people and the government to keep on fighting. Hence, we tried everything, and yeah, we did not go shy from actually utilizing the atomic bomb. If that would have not worked, I don't know. I'm not really a specialist in the Pacific War at all. I don't know what the next steps. I mean, they would have had to continue, obviously, and they would have continued to really get the final surrender. But that's why it's so. Yeah.
This footage first came to my attention in 1985 when I did a documentary on the invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, which was had two parts, Operation Coronet and Operation Olympic. Operation Coronet would have taken Kyushu, the island of Kyushu, on November 1st, 1945. And I make the point in the film about the stockpile of Purple Hearts they made in anticipation of what was going to happen there. And Operation Olympic was going to take place in March of 1946, and that was going to take the Japanese mainland. So I actually have a 900-page typewritten draft that I've kept for 30 years of the original typed invasion plans. So it was not theory. It was completely organized. And the Japanese knew it, and the Japanese knew they were going to hit Kyushu, and they'd held back an immense amount of kamikazes, and they were moving troops from Manchuria down to the homeland. So it would have been an indescribable bloodbath if that had happened. And then when you throw in that a typhoon hit right before November 1st, just a freak of nature, a typhoon hit when all the invasion fleet was amassed. So you would have had people being wiped out in the typhoon and then thrown into the teeth of the Japanese in Kyushu. So as anyone who was sitting there in those waiting to be deployed there, if you understand what was on the books, and guys from the European theater, General Nava, your relative in the 101st Airborne, he wasn't going home in May. He was more likely than not being staged in the United States and being moved over to the Pacific Theater. That's what he had to look forward to.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, right. I gotcha. Well, all I can say is thank God that did not happen.
Well, and that's where you get into this problem.
And what I'd like.
Yeah, sorry.
Hang on one second. Let's just go into the next clip, and then we can talk about this afterwards.
Oh, I'd rather talk history than see my movie.
And this is just. But wait, this is one of the best moments in the movie. Please. And this particular story really floored me, Eric. Could you just play the next clip, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. sequence floored me. I mean, when I saw it in the film, it was just so brilliant. I mean, the way that you intercut the preparations for the test A-bomb in July with the title cards about the Purple Hearts, it just killed me. And I had never heard that story of the Purple Hearts before. Where did you find that story? Is it that common knowledge?
It really isn't. And this, again, Paul, you know, we have to have a much longer conversation here because you're noticing all the stuff that matters. I had heard that story, but I couldn't run the source down. But I put it in the film, and then when Ian Toll, who is if you're familiar with Robert Caro and his books on Johnson, Ian Toll is to the Pacific War what Robert Caro is to Lyndon Johnson. I said, you know, that's the one fact I know. I heard it. I can't run it down. And he said, you know, I've heard it too. And then pretty much on the final moments of this thing, he ran it down and we found 2 different original citations for it. So I'm happy to say that I didn't have the dilemma of, do I go with something I think I heard once or do I make it accurate? And then as far as the filmmaking, again, it's not traditional. It's not, it goes against, I come from television, sadly, but I've learned to work around television, and television is always say it, see it, pound it in, and the idea of setting up the bomb and not saying what that was with these haiku history, very bleak title cards that say something completely different, and then connecting it up at the end where you go, oh, I get it. It's the bomb that stopped that from happening. Oh, that's making me, you let the viewer, you don't have to give the viewer A, B, C, D. You can give them A and E and they'll get to, you know, H. You know, it's not, people in television often, and I'm guilty of it too, don't give the viewer the credit for putting the pieces together. Does that answer the question?
Exactly. I mean, it's just, oh, absolutely. You know, I'm so glad to hear, you know, that you sourced down that story, because it's just the horror of it and the poetry is just overwhelming to me.
Well,
and the juxtaposition between the 2 things, it was.
And I did an interview recently where I was being pinned down, or they attempted to pin me down on, well, what did you think? What does the film say about the dropping of the atomic bomb? And I was able to answer very honestly, my opinion does not matter. This is what happened. This is what the guys said. And we juxtaposed and put what they said in the film. That's it. You know, what does my opinion matter? You know, I have an opinion, and I could hold forth for quite some time scholarly on the decision to drop the bomb and all its ramifications. But who cares what I think? It doesn't matter. I wasn't there. The guys who were there. They're the only opinion that really matters.
General Nava, any response to the Purple Hearts section? I mean, did you know that story beforehand? Did you?
No, I did not know that story, and it was amazing. It really was. You know, when I think about the meat grinder kind of mentality that the military oftentimes uses, World War I is what we think about. Obviously, World War II was very difficult, but I'd never heard that story.
Right. Florian, any response from you to the Purple Hearts story?
I also have not heard that story before, so that's great. Please share your sources about that, so it doesn't get lost to history later on. That is really great.
Right.
Well, I did a film on B-17s called The Cold Blue, which was sort of the predecessor of this film. And a quote I used was, flying in an unpressurized B-29 over Germany was equivalent to standing at the top of Mount Everest, same altitude without an oxygen mask. And that's what these guys did in that same sub-zero temperature. And when I've seen this in theaters, and when you get to that quote, it's like a punch in the solar plexus. People are like, oh, wow, I never thought that. So I definitely am very, as a writer, to do a script for a documentary of 2 hours that is a page and a half if you printed it out, you know, every word's got to count and have an impact. And it's one of the, probably the toughest thing about this film was battling with these damn cards, and drove me crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure. You end that sequence with the powerful shot of the test explosion on July 16th in New Mexico, but you never see the bomb explode in Hiroshima. In terms of the design of the overall film, again, I feel like that was intentional on your part. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, ironically, we have color footage of the bomb over Nagasaki. I had beautiful, amazing color footage, aerial footage of the bomb over Nagasaki. It just didn't seem to fit, so I never really gave much thought to putting it in. And as far as Hiroshima goes, and again, Paul, you're an editor, you dance with what brung you. We didn't have color footage. There is no color footage of the Hiroshima explosion. And I had this incredible footage that was shot by Harry Mamura, cinematographer who was trained under Greg Toland, who was the director of the film that John Ford shot the opening footage for. So I didn't know it at the time, but I knew that this footage in Hiroshima was shot by a very gifted cinematographer. Whoever this guy was, he was on his game, which is why I was very careful just to use the tracking shots and the crane shots and all of the things that he was clearly trying to do. Why? Because Harry Mamura was filming his hometown of Hiroshima. And I put his name in on the slate to give him the credit he deserved. And it was only after finishing that sequence, really only about a month ago, that I realized I found out about the Harry Mamura story. So it's interesting. I always felt conscious with the photography that since I had the raw footage, these men who shot at Iwo Jima and Okinawa and on the decks of these aircraft carriers, they were filming things for a reason in sequence. And they were in many cases gifted photographers. So as I would approach a sequence, I would try to say, well, what were they trying to do? How would they have put this sequence together? Were they with me? And that really dictated a lot of my choices. And in many documentaries, stock footage is just used as slapped on as Band-Aids to cover people talking. It's not used in and of itself. It's not showcased with the original intention of the filmmaker, of the cameraman. So once you make these basic decisions, a film like this is pretty much very easy to put together if you go in with the right sort of, again, Paul, you're an editor. Once you set up your own guardrails and you say, we're going to adhere to those guardrails, we're not going to break it, it often makes it easy to put together a lot of 140 reels and 30 hours of interviews. It goes together very quickly. We cut this whole thing, started editing. We finished interviews last week in February, and we're done with a fine cut third week of May. So we did not take long to put it together.
Wow. That's pretty astonishing, if you ask me. Given the beauty of the editing of the film and how it's all structured, that's really amazing, Eric. So kudos to you. Let's now play the last clip I chose, which is of Hiroshima, and we're going to go back to Issei Nakagawa, who we met at the beginning in the opening.
I could only remember what was a usual day. You just wake up and start cleaning up to get to work. All the kids that go to high school and above go to the city because that's where the high schools are located. And the kids, all the students, were trained to become lathe operators, drillers. I mean, they were all manufacturing something. Well, anyway, we were outside walking toward our destination, and we heard the air raid go on. And they saw one B-29 flying over. So everybody took cover, waited until something happened. but it seemed like nothing happens. The air raid signal came back and said it's clear here. Everybody came out, and this is when the B-29, I think, dropped something like a parachute, and there were a lot of people looking at it. And meanwhile, I was inside the building then already. And that's when the whole thing just blew up, you know, just everything went black.
You know, as a documentary filmmaker, I mean, I've seen so many sequences depicting the Hiroshima A-bomb explosion, but never anything quite like this, Eric. First of all, the decision to use the color footage from February of '46 as the imagery, while Ite tells us about the ordinariness of his day leading up to that incredible explosion. And then again, you don't show the explosion because we've already seen the test, and that's enough. And instead, you go to the clock, which is just stopped, and the soundtrack drops out. And then one of your first images is that Japanese man sitting by the building, and then he disappears into that kind of after image of where he was sitting. And that moment is so powerful. But there's also something about, while he describes this horror that happened, you're also seeing the city in a certain way come alive again. There's trolley cars going, there's people walking, there's carts going by. And seeing that attempt at resurrecting life after that unbelievable horror is just, it was just heartbreaking to me. Absolutely heartbreaking. It was so good.
Again,
so good.
what can I say,
bringing
Paul?
Issei so that it's just it was very, very moving and very poetic. I mean, I just was really astonished by it.
Well, this is where I will step out. I refer to that sequence as, I called it the streetcar named Hiroshima. And if you notice, because I noticed Mamura, that one shot where the streetcar almost hits the camera, where he clearly set up the camera and knew that the streetcar was going to come by within a foot of him. Every shot is a crane lift or a slight move. And again, I sometimes, and I think you know this, Paul, as an editor, this whole sequence, that entire Hiroshima sequence, we cut in a day. You know, I knew what it was. I had the idea of use the streetcar as a hologram of Hiroshima, except it's everyday life, but you're hearing about the day, and it's like radio. You're connecting visually the dots to the city, and it's having the impact on you that it seemed to have had. And then we had the sound effect of the explosion is the identical sound effect we heard over Alamogordo. Exact sound effect, same exact audio. So it's almost a kind of radio where what you imagine is happening is stronger than what you could possibly either recreate or show with, you know, the obvious dig up archive black and white images. And then Itsei, and I just want to announce today, he finally got back to us having seen the film. We were very nervous because he sang at the beginning and he was reluctant to do that. And we were obviously, as one of the pivots of the film, I want to make sure that everybody who contributed, who allowed us to tell their story, was fine, and he was totally on board. He said, I wish I'd had more rehearsal on that song, but he was glad that we put in the Oppenheimer bite. He was very happy, and he invited me to come up to El Cerrito for lunch anytime. So as I'm going to take him up on his offer. But thank you for noticing that sequence, because that was one that, you know, again, as a professional, the first hour of the movie took probably 3 months to cut from March, April, May, or whenever we did it. And the last 45 minutes we threw together in about 3 weeks. We ran out of time and we had deadlines. So that's when I stepped in more. Paul really got the first hour and set a lot of the tone. And then the last 45 minutes, I worked with a second editor and cut it exactly the way I wanted, and then gave it to Paul, who then kicked it up, put the spook in and kicked it up several notches. But that Hiroshima sequence is one that as happy as I am to give Paul credit for the aerial dogfight sequence, that Hiroshima sequence I did. Again, we're talking craft here. This is more appropriate.
I was just wondering. Yeah, sorry to get so much into the filmmaking, but I was curious, General Nava and Florian, what response did you have? I mean, I'm sure you've seen many sequences of the Hiroshima bombing. How did you feel about the way it was depicted in Apocalypse 45?
No, again, I think I appreciated the brutal honesty and not shying away from what it was. And in the discussion about the craft is just it's mind-boggling to me, because I have technical and tactical expertise in doing what I do as an officer in the Army, but to hear what you do behind the scenes to make the impact that we have in these films is very interesting to me. So again, great work. It did have exactly the impact that you expected. I appreciate the fact that it wasn't sugar-coated, and it had absolutely the impact that you were seeking to have.
Well, thank you.
Florian, do you have anything to add?
You're what we call our core audience, General. So, I'm honored and grateful that it worked.
Florian, are you still with us, or?
Yes, I am. So for me, the same thing. And it really kind of reminded me, once again, your life will go on after the war's over, after the destruction, but also the destruction stays in the minds of those soldiers that you interviewed. And when they talk about it, and once again, you hear some of the regret and some of those other stories, which is kind of, I think, important why some of those veterans should go back to where they fought, to relive, to go back to, like a lot of, obviously Vietnam veterans have done that quite a bit, as well as other ones, but to go back to get some closure for vets. And this is kind of how I saw the scene. So very talentedly done. Well done.
Great. We're pretty much at the end of the program, at least what I have planned to do. General Nava, Florian, was there anything else you wanted to ask Eric about the film, just to open this up a little bit more? Or
well, Eric, again, I did not a question, but just more of a comment and thanks. The history, of these World War II veterans is being lost every day, and as you mentioned, 2 of these gentlemen just passed away recently. Thank you so much for helping tell their story and keep this history alive. Very important that our current and future generations know of the sacrifices of those that fought during this war, but all of our wars.
Well, thank you. And actually, sadly, 2 others, 4. We've lost 4 of them as of today. And we may have lost more. We're literally checking in. We've gotten so close to them over the last, meeting them and sharing our stories. I just want to I'm very conscious of getting them the finished film so they and their families can watch it. So we're getting them copies, and we sent copies as soon as we could. And we're giving our interviews, the raw interviews and transcripts, to the families too. So they actually have the full interview we recorded as well as a transcript. So they have it for their archives. So, I feel a real responsibility to those guys to get it right. And maybe that's what informed a lot of the choices I made. They were my audience. I knew they would know if there was something wrong, inaccurate, or not astringent and not, reflective of what they really went through. So they were kind of my invisible audience. And I do have to say, and Paul, you can appreciate this, when the Discovery Channel, who saw no rough cut, no edit script, no anything, they saw pretty much the entire film as it was completed in May, and it was locked in the room. There were no notes. And it's the only time in my career, literally in my entire career, where I've done a film that had no notes from the network. And that's to their credit for funding it. And that's to their credit for kind of allowing a quote unquote creative to kind of go for it and not, just letting it go. And that, and that's unusual, as you must know, for an American television network to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good for them is what I say. So, one last question for you, General Nava, if you don't mind. You and Jason were talking the other day about you can't really understand U.S. military history without understanding New Mexico's military history. Could you speak about that a bit before we close?
Okay, sorry about that. Having technical difficulties here. I lost my light.
Oh, okay.
That's why we're not doing video. But so I think that's one of the stories that we want to help perpetuate. Again, we have the New Mexico Military History Museum, which is there next to the Center for Contemporary Arts.
Yeah.
Part of our mission is to tell New Mexico's military history. And so New Mexico has a very proud history. In every single conflict, there has been some New Mexicans involved, from our nation. And specifically beginning with the Civil War forward, there's been very large contributions of New Mexicans in each of those conflicts. And we want to tell those stories, and we want to be historically correct. And that's part of the reason that I brought Florian Vital over to the New Mexico National Guard to help me tell the story correctly. And so I love seeing stuff like this documentary from Eric. Just fantastic. We want to tell those stories, be accurate. There's a lot of things happening in our country right now, specifically around historical type events. What happened, what didn't happen. I would love to have my museum be a place for discourse, proper adult kind of conversations about what happened, what didn't happen. And
did we lose you? General, are you there?
I'm sorry.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
There.
I'm still here. Hang on a second. So, anyways, that's part of our mission, is to be able to tell that story and do it accurately. Have some dialogue about these topics that happened in New Mexico's history, in our U.S. history. And so, again, great work, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with you all.
Great. All righty. Well, listen, thank you all for agreeing to do this for CCA. And Eric, thank you again for making this extraordinary film and allowing CCA to make it a part of the Living Room series. We really, really appreciate your participation.
Well, all I want in
I'm
return,
sure that our audiences really appreciate it.
All I want in return, guys, is lunch at the shed in the not too distant future. I want all of us. So is it a date or what?
Sounds great.
You got it.
Great.
No problem. Before we all leave, the Living Room series often likes to end these sessions with one last kind of exit clip. It's only a minute long, a pretty wonderful thought from a 93-year-old veteran. So let's go out and go home with this vet's thought.
We were all Americans. We had different religions, different faith, different political parties, but the most important thing of all was being an American. We were unified in that. That gave us a lot of strength. We were one in those days. And now at 93, having been through the war and a couple other wars since, I look back and I still feel the same way. We had a strong belief in this country